Several Latin American countries have heavily criticized the United States military action in Venezuela, which President Donald Trump described as a large-scale operation that resulted in the capture of the Venezuelan leader Nicolás Maduro. The strongest condemnation of the attack came in a strong posts on X from neighboring Colombia's President Gustavo Petro. Petro has frequently clashed with President Trump and has also been threatened and also sanctioned by the U.S. President. The Colombian government rejected the aggression against the sovereignty of Venezuela and Latin America. This is what Petro said in a message, while calling for an immediate meeting of the United Nations Security Council, of which Colombia is a member. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva echoed Petro's comments. In a statement, Lula said, and I quote, "The bombings on Venezuela's territory and the capture of its president cross an unacceptable line. These acts represent a grave affront to Venezuela's sovereignty and yet another extremely dangerous precedent for the entire international community." Cuban president has demanded strong action from the international community against what he called a criminal attack by the U.S. on Venezuela that Trump says led to the capture of Maduro. Chile's outgoing President Gabriel Boric condemned the attack on Venezuela and the capture of Maduro, warning about the precedent it could set.
Today, it is Venezuela. Tomorrow, it could be anyone else. Likewise, the threat of unilateral external control over its natural resources or strategic resources constitutes a serious violation of the principle of territorial integrity and puts at risk the security, sovereignty, and stability of all the states in the region. If they can do it there, why couldn't they do it somewhere else in the future?
But putting forward an entirely different tone, Chile's president-elect José Antonio Cast, who rose to power by promising to crack down on migration and crime, said in a post on X that Maduro's arrest was great news for the region. In Mexico, President Claudia Sheinbaum also condemned the U.S. intervention in Venezuela.
We have stated, we condemn any intervention and we are guided by what the Constitution establishes. This goes beyond even the presidency of Maduro. It has to do with international policy, international law, the international legal order, and with very clear principles of Mexican foreign policy that we defend.
Meanwhile, the governments of Peru and Paraguay have said they are closely monitoring current developments in Venezuela. The two countries have called for a prompt solution to Venezuela's political situation, urging a transition with full respect for international law and human rights. While few leaders strongly denounce U.S. action about Maduro's ousting, Argentinian President Javier Milei described the U.S. military action in Venezuela as an excellent news for the free world and the capture of Maduro, the collapse of the regime of a dictator. On the other hand, the South American country's Guyanese president, Irfan Ali, took to social media platform X and reiterated Guyana's stance to support efforts that uphold democratic norms and ensure the region remains a zone of peace. On behalf of the government of Guyana, he also lauded Trump's leadership in reaffirming shared commitments to freedom, democracy, and regional security. Mr. Scott Lucas is a professor of international politics, Clinton Institute in University College Dublin. He's now joining us live from Wicklow, Ireland. Mr. Lucas and Professor, Happy New Year and thank you very much for your time. There's a lot that has happened in Latin America. The region is on alert following what happened in Venezuela. And we saw the statements from Marco Rubio. He says the President of the United States doesn't play games. Which country do you think is next on America's radar in Latin America?
Well, at least in terms of rhetoric, Donald Trump and Marco Rubio identified 3 countries on Saturday, even as they celebrated the kidnapping of Nicolás Maduro. In an interview in the morning, Donald Trump told Fox TV that Mexico better watch itself. In other words, President Sheinbaum, because he saw that they were not helpful, that they had criticized him. Then, during the press conference, that rambling press conference where Trump was slurring his words, but still saying that the U.S. will run Venezuela, he and Rubio both said that Cuba better watch out. And Trump also said that Colombia, under the left-wing president Gustavo Petro, who has criticized the action of Venezuela, that it could be targeted because it supposedly, or Petro was supposedly involved in drug operations. So what Trump did yesterday with this declaration of the Donroe Doctrine, in other words, this extension of the 19th century U.S. colonialism and its approach, not just towards Europe, but to countries of Latin America, would say, we dominate this hemisphere so we can act whenever and wherever we want. It doesn't mean the U.S. will. I think they'll have their hands full with Venezuela. I don't think it will be easy for them to occupy the country and to take Venezuela's oil, but he is going to wave that, shake his fist at anybody who he doesn't think is following him and his particular vision of politics and U.S. power.
Professor Lucas, the Democrats are livid following the actions by President Trump in Venezuela. How do you think Congress is going to act in the coming week? Because, again, this has roiled so many politicians, including some in the Republican Party.
I mean, I'm going to say this as both a person and analyst. It's not just the Democrats who should be livid. Everyone should be livid. The Maduro regime was a repressive regime. It detained, intimidated, sometimes killed its critics. It ran Venezuela's economy into the ground. But what the Trump administration did was flout international law, flagrantly break international law and the international system by going into a country, a sovereign country, and kidnapping its leader. Now, in terms of what will happen in Congress, the Democrats will oppose this. They'll object. So we have to turn to the Republicans who have those slight majorities. So far, the few Republican voices that have criticized this have been those who have criticized Trump anyway. Representative Thomas Massey, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, who also criticized Trump over the Epstein scandal, Senator Rand Paul, who as a libertarian is opposed to U.S. interventions abroad. The question will be, when will more Republicans speak out? Right now, they're being very quiet. If there aren't further problems, especially if the U.S. can either get a Venezuelan government that accepts Trump's demands or can put in an opposition government that is accepted by the population, the Republicans will say this is a great victory. If, however, what is effectively a U.S. occupation runs into problems, as it has in other countries, and we all know what happened in Iraq, then you'll see more Republicans who will come out and criticize Donald Trump. But how long will that take? That's the key question.
Professor Lucas, it's good to see you. Thank you very much for your time and for talking to us today.
Thanks to you and your great viewers.